Let's continue with Pirkeh Avot. We got some more things to discuss over here. So it brings here also on Perk Shishi, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, that there are some things, which are good for tzaddikim, not really so good for rashaim. Listen to this, right? So what are we talking about? It's only good for tzaddikim, these things. So it says, right, that what are they? Noi. What is noi? That means, that a person is handsome, good looking, right? So it's good for a tzaddik to be handsome, good looking, but not so good for rasha. You understand why that is? You get the idea? What's the reason why? Why it's not good for rasha to be handsome? Why is it good for tzaddik? Because when tzaddik is handsome, right, he makes kiddush Hashem, People see him, they say, oh, look at this, he's a good-looking man, tzaddik, Talmid Chacham. So it's good for him, it makes kiddush Hashem. So what does that mean? Because he's good-looking, he's handsome, people respect him more, So that's good, to respect the tzaddik, to respect the Chacham. He looks good, and so people give him kavod, and they give him respect to listen to him also, right? To listen to his Torah, and they listen also what he tells them, But for rasha, right, it's not good to be handsome. Why? Why is that? What's the reason why? Because when a rasha is good looking, he uses his good looks, for sins, for averot. That's what it is, What does he do? He goes after women, because the women like good looking guy, he goes after them. He does things like this, He does sins when he's good looking. Also, they give him kavod, because he looks handsome. But he doesn't deserve kavod, right? This guy, He doesn't deserve. When you give rasha kavod, it's no good. Why is that? Because you're making him to do even more sins. They say, oh, look, they give me kavod. They like me. So that makes him even more arrogant, even more conceited. So he does even more sins. Gives them. So it's not good for rasha to have good looks. It's good for tzaddik. This thing, right? That's what it says, right? Yeah. Okay. Next one, right? Another one. It says also koach, right? So what does that mean? It's good for tzaddik to be a strong man, gibor. They say the tzaddikim, they were giborim, like Moshe Rabbeinu, right? David HaMelech. All of them were giborim, strong people, They had supernatural powers, Like they say about Aaron HaKohen. What do they say about him? They say, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded him when the Levi'im, right, were brought into the service of the Avodah, of the Mishkan, right? The mitzvah was that Aaron had to take every one of them and wave them, like this. When they came into the Avodah. Each one he has to wave. So, how many Levi'im were? It was more than 20,000 people there, Can you imagine? He waved all of them, 20,000 people like this, like this, like nothing, like you're waving a hamburger, like this, That's very hard to do that, You have to be a big gibor. Can you imagine 20,000 people like this, Jump, 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 jump. You have to be a big gibor to do such a thing like this. So you see, right, that they were giborim, these tzaddikim, they had a lot of gibura. It's good for them. Why is it good? Because they can fight against the rashaim, against the wicked. When a tzaddik is gibor, the rashaim are scared of him. People are scared. So he's able to rule over them. To be tzaddik is supposed to be the ruler. So when they're scared of his koach, when they're scared of his gevurah, that's a good thing. But rasha, right? When he has gevurah, what does he do? He goes and picks on people. Picks fights. Makes fights. He beats up good people, right? Tzaddikim. The koach that he has, rasha, he uses it to do sins. The same thing, again, right? To beat people up. To be violent, to rob people. Rasha, So for tzaddik, it's good to be gibor, because he can use that to serve Hashem. You know what I mean? To be strong. But rasha, when he's strong, right, he uses it to do averot. Like this. Let me tell you just one thing really funny. I just heard just the other day. That there was, right, a few years ago, long time ago, when we were younger a little bit, right, there was this big boxer, Tyson, Mike, Mike, right? Everybody knows about him. He was a big gibor, big boxer, So You know what happened, right? When he was a kid, he was a criminal. You know this kid. You know he was going and getting into fights. He lived in Brooklyn, Brownsville. You know, bad neighborhood over there, right? Tough. Getting into fights. There's beating people up. Right? You know how it is, right? Like criminals. Like animals. They live over there in this place. That's what he was doing. He was fighting with people all the time in the street punk. So he said, something funny. What he said was, what happened was, that then this Italian guy came, right, and adopted him, and took him upstate to train him to be a boxer. Right? This guy, he trained him, He made him into a boxer instead of being a criminal. He turned him into an athlete, So what happened was, right, that he said, that he was training me. He says sometimes what I was doing. Listen to what he says. Right? He says, when we finished the training, he says sometimes I would go back to Brooklyn, and I needed some money, so I would go rob people, rob some people, in Brooklyn, and take their money and go back upstate. That's what I was doing. This is what happens, when a Rasha, he's Gibor. What does he do? He does, crimes, to rob people. That's what he does. This is what he does. You understand? That's why Givurah is not good for Rashaim. It's only good for Tzaddikim, But Tzaddik is Gibor. He does with that mitzvot, Kiddush Hashem. Everybody, says, you see this Tzaddik, he's Gibor, he's strong, he's handsome, good looking. It's Kiddush Hashem. Good for them, not good for the Rashaim. Okay, let's move on. Right, another quality right over here. Also, right, it says Osher. Same thing, Osher is good for tzaddikim, not good for rashaim. What does that mean? Wealth, right? When tzaddik is wealthy, what does he do? He does tzedakah, right? He does mitzvot with the wealth, He opens yeshivot, he opens the knesset, right? Like the rabbi did, right? That's what you do, when you're a tzaddik, you take your money, you open bet knesset, you open yeshiva, you open kollel, you do mitzvot with your chesed, you open gemach, all kinds of things like this, right? Rasha, with his money, what does he do? He goes and does sins also with the money. Goes to lo aleinu, right? Goes to prostitutes. All kinds of all kinds of sins. What does he do, Rasha? When he has money, he does looking for problems. To get into trouble. That's with his money. Goes over here. Spends money over here. Spends money over there. So what happens is that Rasha, when he has wealth, he takes that money, and gets even worse in life. He does more and more sins. What happens, right? When a person has money, what happens, right? He becomes very confident. Arrogant. How it is, right? People have money, they think they are the boss of the world. They think they can control everything, They look down at you like this, "Oh, who are you? You little guy. And you know how rich I am? I can buy you and sell you in 2 minutes. What are you looking at me for? That's a rich person, So when he's a Rasha, what does he do? He uses his money like this, for sins. Also, to intimidate people. To fight against people, to sue them, take them to court. He has lawyers, right? When a person is rich, right, he's got all kinds of lawyers, So when something happens, he sends his lawyers, to sue this guy, to make problems everywhere. This is what happens when you're a Rasha, you have money. It makes you even worse. That's what Hashem does, by the way, to the Rashaim. You know what he does, right? Because he hates them. He hates the Rashaim. What he does is, he sends them a lot of money so they can get into trouble, and do more sins, because he wants to punish them, So he tells them, okay, you want to be Rasha? I'll give you money, I'll send you more money. Go and do more sins, because I want to punish you in the end, That's what's going to be with you. I'm going to get you in the end for everything. So I give you, everything right to your face. Let you have olam hazeh, to have wealth. That's the thing, So for the Rasha, wealth is not good, because he becomes even more of a Rasha when he gets wealthy. That's what happens, Tzaddik, what does he do? Mitzvot, with his money. All mitzvot, right? Chesed. He supports his family, supports the community, right? Supports the poor, right? Opens yeshivot, opens this, opens that. That's what a tzaddik does, So that's good for him. He does the zechut, he has the chuyot with the wealth. But Rasha, all the sins he does with the wealth. That's what he does. What does he do? That's what it is, So it's not good for them to be wealthy. Better for them to be poor. That's the thing, Because they get into big trouble like that. Okay, fine. Let's move on. Another thing, right? It says he hits everything right on the spot. Another thing also, which is not good for Rashaim, you know what it is? That they should have kavod. Not good for Rasha. Why? Because when Rasha has kavod, people give him kavod, they listen to him, they think he's, important guy, right? He's something, chashuv. They think he's a big shot, right? So they say, oh, we should give him kavod. But it's not good, to give kavod to Rasha. Why? Because when you give him kavod, he thinks, he's a big tzaddik, he thinks he's very good. He thinks he's a good guy, So it makes him even more arrogant, even more sins, even more bad midot. That's what happens to a Rasha when you give him kavod, So the truth is, if a person is a really smart, you should know, by the way, if you're a really smart guy, don't ever give kavod to a Rasha. Because you're making him even worse, by giving him kavod. You're making him to do more sins, to go on a worse path. So what should a person do Rasha? Treat him, not with kavod, treat him like, you're nothing, you're nobody. Like, you're just a regular guy, I'm not going to give you no kavod. What should I do for you, I should stand for you when you come into the room, stand up for you, What for? You're Rasha. I should give kavod to a Rasha, what doesn't deserve it. But for tzaddikim, kavod is good, why? Because since they have kavod, everybody listens to them, he teaches them Torah, he teaches them mitzvot. So when they have kavod, people listen to the tzaddik, and that's good, It brings everybody to do zechuyot. That's why they say the Chazal, that the worst thing that a person can do is to give chanufa to Rasha. What does that mean? Chanufa. To give him compliments, Tell him, yeah, you're such a good man, God bless you, He's not a good man, he's a Rasha. No, number one Rasha he is. So what are you telling him he's a good man? You know what I mean? You're not allowed to do that. Why? Because again, right, as we said, when you give kavod to Rasha, you give him compliments, he gets even worse. He thinks, you see, people respect me, I give kavod. So I can do whatever I want, they're not going to say nothing. That's what happens, when you give kavod to Rasha. He doesn't deserve it, So all these things that we mentioned, every one of them is bad for Rasha, good for tzaddik. That's the thing. Okay, let's move on.
That's how Purim happens.
Okay. Another one, right? Listen to this. Also chokhmah, wisdom. Here also, right? Chokhmah is good for tzaddik, he should be wise. Chacham. But is it good for Rasha to be chacham? No good. Right? Why is it bad? Because the more he's chacham, the more sins he's going to do. He knows how to do all the tricks. He knows how to cheat people, how to be sneaky. To be underhanded. To pull scams on people, to scam people, to mistreat them. Because he's chacham, he knows how to manipulate also. People who are rashaim and they're smart, they're clever, they know how to manipulate you. To brainwash you. They talk to you. They tell you all kinds of chokhmot, and they pressure you, with their mentality, with their pressure, they brainwash you. They manipulate you like this. So it's not good for a rasha, to have chokhmah. Better that he should be stupid. He's going to get much less trouble. That's why they say, unfortunately, this Imach Shemo, Hitler, he was very clever. This is the problem. This is why he succeeded, to kill so many Jews, to kill so many people. Why? Because he was clever, He wasn't that clever, by the way, because he was also he had some stupidity also. He was also a little bit stupid, He didn't listen to people, He didn't listen to nobody. He thought he was smarter than everybody else. But he had enough chokhmah, enough, to become the leader, over there, and to start the wars, to conquer nations. He had chokhmah there, So it's no good, When a rasha has chokhmah, dangerous, The wiser he is, the more dangerous he is. So we don't want, that the rashaim should have chokhmah. But tzaddik, right? When he has chokhmah, what does he do? He learns Torah, he teaches Torah, right? He makes chidushim in Torah. He does kiddush Hashem with the chokhmah, All kinds of good things, He helps people, he does chesed with the chokhmah that he has. Tzaddik, everything he has chokhmah, he does it for L'Shem Shamayim. Rasha, everything he does for sins, for crimes, to be a criminal. Wise criminal he is, That's dangerous. Okay, good, you got the idea.
Today we don't have tzaddik, right?
Why not? Why not? Why
We
not?
don't have tzaddik people today.
Why not? We don't have to. You're one of them.
Oh.
I think you are. I don't know. That's what I think. Okay, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about it. Okay, let's go on. So we're almost finished, right? We got two more here. Zikna and Seva. These are the two last ones, right? And we'll stop here. What does that mean, Zikna and Seva? Longevity, long life. It's good for tzaddik to live long. To have long life. Why? Because the more he lives, the more mitzvot he'll do, the more Torah he'll learn. So he can do more zechuyot for himself and for the community, for everybody. The longer he lives. So what happens, right? When a person has a long life, he becomes experienced, in life, and more chokhmah, he has more wisdom as he gets older, So what happens is he's able to do more because he's now wiser, more experienced, So he can do more mitzvot, more zechuyot. He can do more Torah, But when a rasha, right, he gets older, he uses the experience that he has, to do more sins. He's wiser, He knows how to trick people, how to scam people more, when he's older. Now he has all the experience, to do all the averot. That's the thing, So it's not good for rasha, So we prefer, lo aleinu, Shem Rachem, right? That a person, rasha, he should die early, Why? We don't want him to live long. Right? So I'll tell you this, something funny, right? There's a pasuk, right? Anshe damim u'mima lo yechetzu emeyehem mehem. What does this mean? Pasuk. You know what this means? That people, who are rashaim, and the people who are killers, and criminals, scammers, cheaters, liars, all kinds of people who are violent also, they kill people, Lo yechetzu yemehem. What does that mean? They won't even live half their life, So meaning what? Let's say, right, he was born, he was destined to live 80 years, let's say, right? For argument's sake, right? 70 years, 80 years. If he's a rasha like this, he scams people, cheats, lies, and kills people, he won't even live half that life. He won't even make it to 40. If he's a bad person like this. Lo yechetzu yemehem. Anshe damim u'mima lo yechetzu. They won't even get to half their age. That's what happens to people who are very violent, and very, criminal, corrupted. They die very young. It's better for them like this. Why? Because when they die young, they do have less sins. They have less averot, less crimes.
Less genom.
Less genom. Yeah, you're right. That's the thing. So it's better for them to die young. But for tzaddik, just the opposite, right? We want them to live long so they can do more zechuyot, more mitzvot, more Torah. It's just the opposite, right? That's the thing. So, as we said, right, that the rasha, it's not good for him. All these things, none of them are good for him because it makes him even worse. For tzaddik, all these things are good, So it really depends on what kind of person, he is, right? By the way, they say, who was an example of this, that they didn't even reach half their age. There's two rashaim, right, who didn't even reach half their age. They died very young. You know who they were? One was Doeg Adomi, right? And one was Achitofel. They say, that they both died very young, like they were like in their 30s when they died, Why? Because since they did all these big sins, Doeg Adomi, what did he do? He killed all the Kohanim, right, in Nov. He personally, with his own hands, took a sword, he killed more than 100 of them over there. Slaughtered them like chickens. So Hashem, yeah, you're right, but he shouldn't have listened, right? When a person tells you to do Averah, you don't listen to him. Even if it's a Melech, it doesn't matter, right? Even if Melech, you don't listen to him. That's what happened. Because nobody can tell you to do against Hashem, right? Even a Melech, nobody can tell you to do that. That's why what happened, over there was that first he told Avner to do it, right? Avner said, no, I'm sorry. I can't do that, because he was tzaddik. But Doeg Adomi, he was Rasha, So he went and he did it. He had no morals, no scruples, no musar. No, nothing, right? So Avner, tzaddik, didn't want to do. That's why, right? That's what you have to do, Even if the Melech tells you to do Averah, you cannot listen to him. Because Hashem, you got to listen to Hashem. He's the Melech, Malchei Melachim. So that's the thing, these two, they say, right, the Chazal, they died very young. You know why? Because they did very big sins, As we said, Doeg Adomi. What about Achitofel? He wanted to kill David, right? He rebelled against the Malchut, but David. This is a very big sin, by the way. You know what they say, right? The Chazal. Whoever rebels against Malchut Bet David, Chayav Mita, is liable to death. Don't mess with the Malchut Bet David, That's what they say. We'll stop here. They say, that when Doeg Adomi, when Achitofel, we said, right, he killed himself. He committed suicide. You know, we spoke about this before. He committed suicide. You know, they say before he committed suicide, you know what he went. You know what he did? He went to his children, you know, and told them one last piece of advice, one last piece of Torah. You know what he told them? Listen to this. He said, "I tell you one thing now. You know, as your father, I'm gonna be gone, right? I'm gonna kill myself. Don't rebel against Malchut Bet David." So he says, "You know why? Because Hashem favors them." He said, "That's what killed me. That's what got me." You know. So he told his sons, you know, don't mess with Malchut Bet David. ברוך ה' לעולם, אמן ואמן. רבי חנן אתה שומר, עשה הקדוש ברוך הוא לעשות לישראל, לפיך הכי בא להם תורה ומצוות, שנאמר דברי חפץ, למען צדקו יגדיל תורה וידיר.